This
Thanks
conference will now be recorded.
for joining us today for our second in our EcoQUIP Plus webinar series. So just a little bit about Jera and who I am. We've basically been working in innovation procurement for 15, I don't know how long, since 2005, 15 years. So quite a long time. And in that time, we've participated in numerous projects, many of which have been in the healthcare sector. And our philosophy, both within the projects but in Jera as well, is that we just want to share what we've learned and what we have found out. And that's what we're doing today, is just sharing from our experience, and just hope that that offers up some ideas that might provoke your changing the way you do things or provoke your response. And we're always delighted to hear back from people with new examples or your views on the sort of things we're saying. If you agree or disagree, that's great. Let's get the discussion going on innovation procurement. So this webinar series overall, what we'd really like to do is get to the point where people have an understanding of what innovation procurement is all about and be enthused about it enough they might actually like to think about joining in or initiating an innovation procurement project. And the methodology that we use is something called the Forward Commitment Procurement approach to innovation procurement. And that's been proven over the years, and we keep improving it. And our partners bring new learning and new ideas, so it just moves on and develops. And I don't think that will ever change. We'll always learn more, and also the world will change around us, as we may have noticed over the last few months. Things happen. So that's about the series. Now, this particular webinar, I just want to talk about customer and supplier perspectives on innovation procurement, and actually start looking at some of the detail of the Forward Commitment Procurement methodology. And we always like stories, so we've got a few case examples as well. So last time, for those of you that joined us, we introduced innovation procurement as a really powerful tool that basically can deliver what you want when you need it. That is, if you think ahead and can anticipate them, at a price that reflects the value that you as an organisation or indeed society places on them. And you can go back and have a look at that webinar if you're interested in looking at part one, if you weren't able to attend. However, what we also know is that procurement is rarely seen and used as a strategic tool to deliver policy objectives and actually to deliver what is actually needed. What we tend to do is buy what the suppliers provide. So we very often buy from catalogues, and that might not be quite what we need. We tend to also fail to engage with suppliers. We don't talk to them as much as we should or indeed could. And I was listening to a really excellent webinar yesterday about procurement and sustainability in the time of COVID-19. And one of the speakers basically saying our big takeaway is that we need to be talking with our suppliers more, and we also need to be diversifying our supply chain and think about more local supply chains. But the point was to say it surprises people that we don't talk to suppliers as much as we should. And we need them. We need them to deliver what it is that we need to run our organisations effectively. So let's have a look at a case example of a company called Anglian Water in the UK that used an innovation procurement approach to deliver its policy objectives. Now, Anglian Water it's a private utility company. The water companies in the UK were privatised, and it's one of the best, I think, most innovative, forward-thinking water companies in the country. And what they did is that they had a CEO that actually participated in the Cambridge university sustainability program. So that was the corporate leaders group on climate change. So he'd had as an education, that's an excellent senior management program if you want to find out more about it. And he was really clear that climate change was really, really important challenge, because they were a very dry region in Anglia. So I'll show you where Anglian Water is. There it is. It's way over in the east of the UK, and it's very dry. It has less rainfall than Jerusalem. Weirdly, it also floods a lot. It's very flat. There's a lot of reclaimed land. And it's suffering at the moment from the effects of climate change, probably more so than other areas of the country. On top of that, you have a strong population growth. There's a lot of house building going over in that area, and that's the area. If you may know, Cambridge is in that area, and also because it's called the food basket of the UK, so it grows a lot of crops that use water, and there's been overuse of agricultural water abstraction. So there's a lot of pressures on them, and what they said is, okay, we need to talk to our suppliers about how we can deliver our policy objectives. And these policy objectives were really clear. They had decided that they wanted to deliver a 70% reduction in capital, that is embodied carbon, by 2030, and they wanted to exceed a 7% reduction in real terms and gross operational carbon by 2020. And that was going to focus on those two policy objectives. The key point here is that they realised that as an organisation, of course, they can't deliver it alone. They can't deliver these reductions in carbon on their own. Like with many, well, in fact, with most organisations, the carbon is in your supply chain. So they said, okay, we need the help of the supply chain, otherwise we're not going to succeed. So they communicated a challenge to their suppliers that basically said, these are our targets, we're strongly committed to them, help us to deliver them and also reduce costs, and we will share the benefits with you. Okay, so if you're a supplier, you're thinking, well, if I want to keep working working with and supplying Anglian Water, then I'm actually going to have to sit up and take notice of this, or I'm going to lose my business. So of course they innovated, and then they engaged their own supply chains to innovate, and they found some really creative ways to reduce carbon and costs. Let's just have a look at one of these examples. I really like this example. Water pipes, as you probably know, are blue, and they're blue because then you know that water is contained in them if you come across them. Responding to the challenge, the supplier of the pipes had a look at the carbon footprint of this product and said, okay, it turns out that blue dye is very carbon intensive. So, very simply, what they said, well, we don't need to know it's blue all the way through. We only need to know it's blue on the surface. So how about if we just used a thin blue outside coating on the pipes rather than making them blue all the way through? Obviously, that's going to reduce significantly the amount of blue dye used. They then thought, okay, well, we're getting used to this idea now, so let's have a look. Water pressure means that some pipes need to be a certain thickness to withstand the water pressure, but the water pressure isn't the same across the distribution network. Okay, so I know, let's make our pipes as thick as they need to be when they've got high water pressure, and let's actually make them thinner where the water pressure reduces. So they were able to reduce the amount of plastic and carbon using thinner pipes whenever they could. And the result is that there was a 90% reduction in carbon. And when I first heard the CEO talk about this case study, I thought I'd misheard. I thought he said 19, and I actually went back and looked at the recording several times. No, it really was a 90% reduction in carbon and lower cost. And of course, as they said, they were going to share the benefits. So They had a clear policy objective. They talked to their suppliers and engaged them in delivering it. And actually, they ran a process of co-creation with their suppliers. And they haven't stopped. I mean, this was several years ago. I dread to think how long ago it was, actually. And they're still doing it. I had a look yesterday, and there's an excellent little video if you're interested, and it's just seeing what they're up to. And they just keep innovating and keep moving this forward. And they're still committed to these organisational goals. So someone was to say, okay, what were the success factors here? Well, the CEO was deeply committed, understood the consequences of climate change, and delivered some strong leadership on some ambitious targets. They set clear goals, and their targets were consistent, progressive, and unambiguous. And they communicated that very clearly to their supply chain. They connected up these policy objectives with the procurement process, and suppliers wanted to innovate. Okay. And Anglian Water continues to be one of the best, if not the best, UK water company. And they're not all like this. I've done a case study called the Tale of Two Water Companies. They're not all as good as this. And it's a shame because they could be. Where did they get to now? Well, again, I had a look at their annual report for last year, and the target that they set of 7%, what they've actually delivered is to 29% reduction in operational carbon. And where have they got to? Remember, they got this 70% reduction in capital carbon by 2030. Well, they're a bit disappointed with themselves because they'd hoped to get to 60% by now, but they've only managed to get to 58%. I think that's a remarkable achievement. That's not trivial to do that. So it works, and they could not have done it without their suppliers. So, innovation procurement. The way in which we engage and talk to suppliers, the way in which we buy things, can hinder innovation, in fact, and not unintentionally. We don't mean to, but it's just part of the way in which we run our processes, or we don't enable suppliers to bring forward innovative solutions. We certainly rarely talk to them about what improvements they could deliver or what innovations they could deliver. And then we miss opportunities, but we can provoke innovation. The case studies that we're looking at over the course of this series will show how innovation procurement rarely fails to provoke innovation in suppliers. There is a huge amount of creativity and innovation potential in the supply chain, as that example from Anglian Water showed, and the ongoing innovations that they're bringing forward continue to show. So, the best thing we can do is to get that creativity and innovation potential working in our direction and targeted at the needs that we have, or the unmet needs that we have within our organisations. And innovation procurement can simply mean removing barriers to innovative solutions. And we looked at several years ago at the e-health market when it was emerging on a project called EPP Health. And what we concluded is that at that time, and possibly still now actually, that we don't quite know how to buy disruptive technology. We didn't know how to buy it because all our budgets, for example, were based on drugs or other things. We didn't have a budget line for e-health digital solutions. So we can just look at how we run even our tendering process and remove the barriers, but more powerfully, we can use innovation procurement fully in the way I think about it as the Forward Commitment Procurement approach, which means undertaking your procurement in a way that provokes the supply chain to invest and develop what you need when you need it at a price that reflects the value that you as an organisation put on it. So as I said at the beginning, I want to have a quick look at perspectives of different perspectives of innovation procurement. And I think it's a common response when people hear the word innovation is that the sort of sense of panic comes upon them, and that's actually quite sensible. If you're a sensible procurer, you're going to worry when you hear the word new, because actually new products and new services have risks. They can't not have risks. They might not work as expected. They may take longer to develop than you anticipated. They may cost more, and they have no track record, so why should I be buying them? So we try to avoid innovation because it is risky, and that's perfectly logical and perfectly sensible. However, if Anglian Water had continued buying what it was buying previously, it wouldn't have delivered the quite significant carbon reductions and efficiencies that it clearly has. In some cases, we have no choice. The old ways of doing things don't work anymore, and existing products and services can't deliver what the healthcare sector or indeed society need. So we're going to miss opportunities, or we might even fail to stand up to the new challenges like COVID-19, like the climate crisis and global heating. We need new solutions. And we also need to enable new disruptive technology to come forward. We often talk about the cost of innovation, and people worry about the cost of innovating. But what I'd like you to think about is how often you think about the cost of not innovating. Okay. So on the other hand, let's have a look at the supplier's perspective. If you're a supplier, developing new products incurs technical risk, and you need to invest, and that's, brings with it time, money you could have been spent doing other things. So you've got opportunity cost there. And therefore, again, if you're a rational supplier, you only innovate if you have to. So in our example, to keep your business, and indeed by coming up with new solutions with an enabling customer, helps you to win new business. And suppliers are very good at handling technical and resource risks. That's what they do. They know how to do that. But what they can't control is, if I invest my time and effort in developing a solution, will somebody buy it? So is there a genuine and credible demand? And if we don't talk to suppliers, they don't know what our needs are. So what we'd look at in innovation procurement is, how can customers encourage and enable suppliers to innovate in a way that is safe and resource efficient, and in a way where the risk is reduced. Looking a little bit in detail at this is our first analysis way back in 2005, 2006, where people often talk in innovation about the valley of death. Okay, so this idea that if you're developing knowledge and you're gaining knowledge in terms of R&D, so you get a lot of government support for R&D, but the nearer you get to taking that knowledge towards commercial goods and services, so going through your demonstration and scaling up phase, the amount of government support available declines. And this is all to do with problems of state aid and worries about state aid. And so you end up with this gap. Just when all the risk is increasing, just when all the costs are increasing, there's very little support available. And you've no idea if this is going to be successful, because you're uncertain about your future sales. So what we did in this analysis is said, okay, instead of thinking about this as a valley of death, let's think about it as a mountain of risk. And if we're going to be a customer that is enabling innovation, we need to find a way of helping suppliers to overcome this mountain of risk. And so the conclusion we came to is we can do that by making the future sales as certain as possible, which led to the development of the Forward Commitment Procurement innovation procurement methodology. Also, if you're actually a supplier and you know that you're targeting something on a clearly articulated unmet need, that is inherently less risky. So from the supplier's point of view, it's all about, is there a credible demand? And if there isn't a credible demand apparent, the suppliers, the only thing they can do is push their ideas at you as a customer. And customers tend to buy what's available rather asking for what they need. So we end up in a bit of a catch-22 situation. So let's think about innovation in response to COVID-19 for a moment. So what we've seen in the healthcare sector and actually across society as a whole is a huge amount of organisational, societal and individual innovation. And this shows us something really, really useful about innovation, is that innovation is driven by necessity. Okay, so all those telemedicine possibilities, all those wearables, technologies that were available and bubbling up there and being slowly absorbed, suddenly, because of the strong necessity, they've actually become the way we do things. And I think that's, incredibly useful information and useful insight when we think about innovation procurement, because what we're trying to do with innovation procurement is translate a necessity into a credible demand to which suppliers can respond and deliver solutions. So innovation procurement is demand-driven, innovation-enabling procurement. But what we tend to find is that very often we're in a situation where customers are going, well, if there was a solution, I'd buy it. And suppliers are going, well, there's no demand. If there was, we'd invest to supply a solution. And what we're trying to do with innovation procurement is to very simply bridge that gap. So let me move on now to talk about a methodology for innovation procurement called Forward Commitment Procurement. When we started looking at this in 2006, we did a lot of reading. There was a lot of literature, a lot of academic papers around, and there were various things that were being said about these are things you have to do if you want to be successfully buying innovation. You need to think ahead. You need to connect policy and procurement. You need to think about your unmet needs in advance. You need to give direction of travel messages to the market so it knows where you're going and the market can then prepare. There's a lot of talk about engaging stakeholders to make sure that your unmet needs were clearly and accurately articulated, that you needed to engage the supply chain before you started the tendering process. Try and find a wider market demand to demonstrate that there is a credible demand out there. Talk to the supply chain, consult with the supply chain, do some pro-innovation tendering. And at that time, competitive dialogue was a new procedure, procurement procedure, and saying, oh, actually, that'd be a great tool for innovation procurement. Outcome-based specifications are a cornerstone of innovation procurement in the majority of cases, as is whole life costing. Balanced award criteria, meaning award criteria not just based on price. Looking at innovating within a contract, so keeping the innovation rolling within a contract. And last but definitely not least, strong leadership commitment. And what we said is, okay, well, that's fine. But if you are a customer in a public sector organisation, what you want to know is, how do we do that? So what we did is we translated that into a methodology called Forward Commitment Procurement. And we very deliberately made this a 3-stage process. And we also wanted to make sure that it was designed in a way to manage the risk of innovation, not just to the supplier, but also to the customer. And the 3-stage process enables you to basically take stock at the end of each of these stages and say, is it worth our while continuing, whether you're the customer or the supplier? This just gives you a checkpoint. So let's look at each of these stages. The first stage I would call preparation. key to successful innovation procurement is the identification of an unmet need. And if you're going to do that accurately and well, then it's a really good idea to talk to end users and stakeholders. Okay, and that means it could be in the healthcare sector, it could be even consulting with patient groups, and we've done that in various projects. Also, making sure that everybody, from the CEO to the maintenance staff, cleaning staff, all have an opportunity where it's relevant to the subject that you're looking at. Set up a multidisciplinary project team. We've actually taken an idea from our Dutch colleagues who were working on a project I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later, who set up something called a decision-making unit, and we're now rolling that out within the EcoQUIP Plus project for our 5 demonstration projects. The key to this is then, having understood and investigated where are we now, we then define the requirement in outcome terms, and then we get clear on what is our demand, what is a statement of demand, and we're all signed up to that. And the key thing here is be careful what you ask for, because you're likely to get it. So having done that and having got to a point saying, okay, this is fully embedded in the organisation, we've got support for it within the organisation, we're really clear what it is we need, and we have a business case and a logic as to why we need it. Let's make sure we tell the supply chain about it. What we most usually do is then do a market sounding, which is a written exercise, launching that market sounding through a prior information notice in the official journal, and then understanding through market consultation workshop, getting feedback from suppliers, and then finally producing a market engagement report, where it just enables us to sit down and say, okay, what have we learned? What has the market told us? Is there capacity, capability, and appetite to respond to this unmet need in the market? And then there's no point doing any of that unless you look seriously at your tendering process and make sure that it is pro-innovation. And one of the things we do as standard now within our projects is a pro-innovation procurement strategy, and that makes sure that your project team is fully aligned and agrees in the strategy you're taking, and that helps people keep their nerve as they're going through the tendering process. And throughout the whole process, we're looking at, okay, we've got this unmet need, surely other hospitals or other organisations have that unmet need. So using our peer networks to actually build collaborative links and say, if this was available, would you also buy it? And that's really helpful to suppliers. So let's have a look now at a case example before we move on to our question and answer session. So, sustainable bed washing facility for the Erasmus Medical Centre in Rotterdam was an EcoQUIP project, and they took their bed washing pretty seriously, and they were in the process of moving from an old hospital to a new hospital on the same site, which was a miraculous achievement. And they had a bed washing facility in the basement that people said pretty much looked like a car wash. And it was coming to the end of its life, and it used a huge amount of energy and water and chemicals. But everyone was quite happy, it had clean beds. But this wasn't going to be a good fit for this new smart hospital. So what were the drivers? They got a new hospital, their current machine was going to basically stop working. It was actually, in fact, out of production. On top of that, they had policy targets for resource and energy efficiency and carbon reduction. And they'd also concluded that they didn't quite know, having put their beds through this cleaning process, were they clean or not? So actually, they were becoming increasingly aware that they needed an auditable process that enabled them to say, we've got clean beds. which apparently caused several rounds of discussion in their decision-making unit. Ultimately, they said, okay, what is our unmet need? Our unmet need is for a sustainable, low-carbon solution to deliver 70,000 clean beds and mattresses per year. So we don't know how, but that's the outcome that we're looking for. Critically, they launched 4 years before a solution was needed, and they launched a prior information notice that set out a challenge to the industry. Key features of their tendering approach, so it's pro-innovation, an outcome-based functional specification. So it had to have the capacity to deliver a number of clean beds that they needed. They need a significant reduction in carbon footprint. They needed an auditable process, and they wanted the total cost of ownership over the life cycle to be as low as possible while achieving the other outcomes. They used the competitive dialogue procedure, and quite radically for them, they had 3 award criteria, equally balanced: strategic fit, carbon footprint, total cost of ownership, and they had never done anything like that before. And to cut quite a long story short, they got a solution, and a brand new solution came into development, and this was through a small Dutch SME. Also, the Dutch SME very cleverly applied for funding from the Ministry of Economy to support their bid. And that's quite interesting, actually, because I think that kind of availability of funding is really, really helpful to this process. But of course, we can't always guarantee that is the case. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to show you what that looked like. So they were really pleased with that, as you can imagine. And it was, here we go, yeah. So what was really key in this, actually, is that let me start again. First of all, if you're actually bringing an innovation forward, you're going to need to prototype it very often. Okay, and very often those prototypes always just remain prototypes because they weren't integrated. That prototyping stage is not integrated into the procurement process. What was interesting here, and this is absolutely key to success, is that the prototyping and the on-site pilot was incorporated into the procurement process, and they did that by having a two-stage conditional contract. The first contract basically said, okay, we're going to contract and co-finance with you a proof of concept. And if you can show us that the proof of concept is working, we'll work with you. They worked closely with the hygiene team, and others had various problems that they had to overcome, but they worked together on that prototyping stage. And then it was like, okay, and if it's successful, we'll work with you. But if it's successful, then we'll contract to fully installed and maintained machines. So there was that certainty. If we can prove this works, we have a certainty of a sale at the end of it, which enabled them. Remember, it's a small company, enabled them to continue with that process. And the co-funding, I think, was key. The supplier funded half of the proof of concept stage, and the customer funded the other half, using, in fact, EcoQUIP money. And it was remarkable outcomes, actually. I mean, not only is it a fabulous solution that just keeps, they keep finding new things that they can clean with it. There was a 65% reduction in carbon, reduced the water and chemical consumption considerably, 35% reduction in total cost of ownership, which is remarkable, right? They'd got everything that they asked for, and more. They can now clean other things using that solution. Yeah, it was a great project, and they won the first Innovation Procurement Award way back when. And if you want to read more about this case study, and indeed the other EcoQUIP case studies, just head over to the resource section of the EcoQUIP website. So this idea of innovative solutions needing to be prototyped, tested or demonstrated is really important. And I like the idea that a procurement process that embraces that and brings an element of this co-creation between the customer and supplier is just an excellent way of moving things forward. And it addresses the problems that suppliers have in bringing innovations to the market, and they're more likely to have a market at the end of it. In this, people look at this and they think this was what they call PCP, a pre-commercial procurement. It wasn't. It was what people would call a PPI, public procurement of innovation type. So there was no R&D upfront investment followed then by another competitive process. No, it was all within the simple procurement process before innovation partnerships actually existed. And innovation partnerships, as you know, or probably know, that are a new technique, new tool, new procedure that was brought forward in the updating of the procurement directives in 2014, wasn't it? And they're still underused, actually. I mean, I think they're a fabulous thing. They're still underused. So if you haven't looked into those, do. And we will be running in the next series, we'll introduce innovation partnerships and hopefully by then bring some nice examples to show you as well. So just to close, innovation procurement and COVID-19. Well, you know, COVID-19 has highlighted huge needs across the whole care pathway and also in other parts of society. And in some ways this is great because the difficult bit of innovation procurement is understanding and recognising a credible unmet need. And I think we've got plenty of them becoming apparent now as part of the COVID-19 pandemic. And innovation procurement offers a means to clarify and communicate those needs to suppliers in an effective way and enable solutions to be delivered. And this is really good because suppliers can then focus their effort where it's needed, and we don't want them wasting their time. We want to target them on the real problems that are being faced. And that means also that healthcare providers get the solutions they need. And all evidence says that suppliers will want to engage with this process. And I do remember sitting next to a supplier once in a market consultation workshop who just turned to me, nudged me and said, "This is gold dust to a supplier." They just love to hear about what it is that you need. So, final thoughts. Innovation will be key in the response to COVID-19 and also to the other challenges we're facing, like the global heating, climate crisis. And innovation procurement, I think, has the potential to play a key role in provoking and enabling demand-led supplier innovation in a way that is timely and resource efficient. But it does mean changing the way we think about procurement and the way we undertake the procurement process. Our typical procurement approaches can't deliver that. The good news is EcoQUIP Plus project offers a means to access know-how and support, and we'd be delighted to hear from anybody that would be interested in joining in the projects that we're busy with, or indeed would like some advice on developing their own project in response to COVID-19, or indeed other challenges that are being faced. Thank you very much for your attention, and I shall now hand back to Hayley.
Thank you very much, Gaynor. That was great. I love those examples. The robotic bed washing facility is always one that fascinated me because they really did not go into this looking for a robotic solution. So it was fantastic the way it all came about. I think we have one question here so far for you, Gaynor, from Ben. In the forward commitment procurement process, which of the 3 stages do you think is hardest and why?
Whenever I'm working with somebody on a FDP project, I usually say, don't worry, this is the hardest bit. It depends really, but I do think sometimes the getting started, the identification and recognition of the unmet need, and actually the acknowledgement that procurement is a way of delivering solutions, just getting across that, then everything else can really just flow. Everything else is logical. And once you've got that unmet need clearly articulated, you've got a team together who are committed, then there's pretty much nothing to stop them.
Okay, I guess that it comes back to a question that I had. I was in terms of translating that need into a credible demand. How difficult is that generally for buyers to do?
And this is why I wanted to talk about the different perspectives of to get across the supplier perspective, because when you're communicating, you've got to think about the person that you're communicating to. In my opinion, you've got to think very clearly. This isn't a document for me. This is a document for the supplier. Okay, so how am I going to demonstrate to them that this is credible and that we're serious about doing this. So I think that's it can be quite tricky, and in different cultures of procurement across Europe, very often customers and procurers are not used to communicating in a sexy way. Let's just say that. You know, they're used to producing formal documents that are quite long, quite difficult to understand, because they're worried about getting something wrong. So there's a lot of provisos in there. And what we're actually producing as part of this process is a marketing brochure. We're marketing an unmet need to you. And what we can do actually, if helpful, is put an example of what we call a market sounding prospectus on the website. And the market sounding prospectus is the key tool of communicating with the market. And what we set out in there is, this is what we need, this is why we need it. I'm going to demonstrate to you that our CEO is fully behind this, so that suppliers feel safe and in actually saying, oh, this is worth our time responding to. So you're in a way marketing your own unmet need to suppliers. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's great. We have another question from Park Towley. I haven't understood how the benefits, how the first example, the water company one, I haven't understood how the first example did share the benefits with the company. This approach is very creative but could be controversial. Could you provide a little more detail? Not sure if that's something you would want to pick up off separately, directly with the person, or if that's something that you expand on here, Gaynor?
Well, I think it's quite simple. What they basically said is, if you help to reduce costs, we'll basically, we're not going to take all that credit and all that reduction. We're actually going to reward you, and we're not going to basically push you down to the last penny because you deliver savings. We're actually going to say, okay, we'll meet you halfway on this, and we'll share the benefits. And that's very motivating for suppliers. And this is interesting. This sort of moves me on to thinking about a discussion about, I suppose, intellectual property to some extent. And this is something that Erasmus thought about afterwards, and I thought they were mad. They didn't do it, but which was that they said, well, what we should have done, they decided, what we should have done is that, given that we helped to co-create this solution, we should have had an investment in the company that delivered the solution. And it's like, why would you do that? Why? That's not motivating for suppliers. And if you had done it, you probably wouldn't have actually delivered the solution. So I think you tread gently into any areas. What you're trying to do is make this an attractive proposition for suppliers. Anyway, I don't know why I went off on a bit of a divergence there. But in terms of Anglian Water, it was simply about sharing the cost benefits that had arisen out of the creativity of the supply chain.
Okay. This probably leads on to the next question from Michael Friel. How do new suppliers bring innovative solutions to the buyers?
Through the procurement process. So what the way in which it would work is, if what we're trying to do is we're trying to let suppliers know in advance, so that if they're interested, they've got time to innovate. And then we're going through that engagement process with them. It's not that they are presenting their innovations because they probably wouldn't want to present them in that. But what we're actually we're not asking what is your innovation. We're actually saying what sort of outcomes could innovation deliver? When could innovation deliver these outcomes? Because at that market engagement stage, we are not in any shape or form evaluating suppliers. We're assessing the supply chain, and we're assessing three key things. Is there a capacity, capability, and an appetite in the supply chain to respond to this? So the questions that we ask in that market sounding and market engagement process are not about the specific solutions. It's about the generalities. If we put this out in a tender, we put these outcomes in a tender, is there going to be a response? Because we going forward into a tendering process, a customer needs to know that yes, the market is going to respond to this. You know, and then when we're in the pro-innovation tendering stage, that's when the actual innovations that can deliver the outcomes are presented. And we work hard to make sure that we design a pro-innovation tendering approach that enables the value of innovation to be apparent by having balanced award criteria and enabling innovations to compete equally with established solutions. A very simple example of that is looking at total cost of ownership, for example.
And suppliers tend to react very well to the whole innovation procurement process, in your experience?
Some do, and they're the ones you want to work with. You know, they're the ones that want to innovate, that want to be creative, that want to bring that creativity to bear. In some supply chains, and we have had a couple of projects, both in the same sector, funnily enough, the waste sector, that didn't get beyond market engagement because they weren't interested in innovating. There was no interest to innovate. They say, we quite like it as it is, thank you. But the ones you want to work with are the ones that say, oh yeah, that's an opportunity for us to distinguish our offering on factors other than price. And that's what suppliers like. You know, it's really dull to be evaluated on price. It's just dull, right? You know, you want to be evaluated on things that distinguish you as a company and distinguishes your solution. So the right kind of suppliers tend to sort of come to the fore in this process, in my experience.
So it actually brings like-minded people together, which is what is likely to make this work. Yeah. One last question for the moment, Gaynor, from Simona. Do you have any data that shows how the use of PPI is or is not increasing?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. I mean, actually, I think maybe I could put this. We could put this link to this webinar I looked at. I did share it on LinkedIn actually. This webinar that I mentioned earlier on sustainability and COVID, and it's one of the procurers was basically saying she was having nightmares of mountains of PPE everywhere. So no, I haven't got any data. Sorry about that, Simona. But we have some interesting thoughts on PPE, but we haven't had time to share them today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. That's all of our questions for the moment. We are 1 minute left on our webinar. So I guess I would just like to thank everyone again for joining us today. I hope you found it really useful and interesting, and that you'll join us for the next webinar, which is on the 6th of August. The next one will discuss stakeholder engagement in procurement. If you've already signed up and registered, which I guess you have because you're here, the link to join the next webinar will be sent to you around a week in advance. And if you know of anyone that would be interested in joining this, then please ask them to sign up via the EcoQUIP Plus website, and that way we'll link them to all of the future webinars that we have and any additional information that's being circulated about the project that may be of interest to them. So thank you once again, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Take care. Thank you.